have a 8x8 region where we've duplicated all the rockets that we have in
Hang
Second Life.
on, I think Sheila says she's bringing somebody else too.
Okay. So if you spend any time in Second Life and moseyed around, and you might have seen our rockets, we're the same organization.
Okay, I've seen them in SL before.
So, but this is a whole new project that doesn't exist over there because it takes way too much room. And so we decided that we wanted to build we started off just prototyping what a Mars habitat would look like, and then we decided to expand it a bit. And so we've been developing this to become a training facility for people to learn how to what Mars colonization is going to be like. So,
Yeah.
and we're working to code everything so that all the functional stuff, you'll not only be able to operate things, but you'll be able to experience them malfunctioning, and you'll be able to troubleshoot them. And when it figures out what's broken, then it'll tell you what you need to replace, and so you need to go and get the replacement parts. And if you don't have the parts in stock, you need to manufacture it from refined resources that you need refining. And if you don't have those in stock, then you need to refine those resources to make the materials to then start manufacturing the parts. So we're making this whole, what we call in situ resource utilization is the NASA term for it, or ISU.
That is cool.
And so all those different components of the process will be, scoreable, testable training processes that will be part of the entire learning process. And so since we're a real world nonprofit, our plan is that people that complete the full training will get a certification from us, what's called virtual analog Mars astronaut training, and they can use that as some credentials for applying for more real world training, because the SpaceX Mars colonization effort, they want to get 1 million people on Mars by the end of this century. And that's going to take a whole lot of training because they can't just dump people there not knowing anything.
That
And,
is very true.
and at present, there's about a half dozen facilities around the world that are mostly focused on training people to be among the first explorers. So they basically have a facility that's just like one pod that 5 or 6 people essentially camp in for about 6 months straight in some remote location. And so they spend, most of their days in there, sleeping, working, living.
They already got the Mars rover, so.
And so
Yeah, I watch a lot of those docs, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Love it.
So, they're going to need to ramp up real world training facilities, but at the same time, the real world training is going to be pretty expensive. So they want to make sure that the people who are qualified for that have gone through a lot of prep work. So our plan is to be part of that sort of a feeder, let's say a farm team sort of system, where we're feeding people who have passed virtual training process. People who are qualified for that, so then they go into the real world training process, which is number one, verifying that they know what they're doing. Like, part of it's psychological testing. You put a bunch of people into a closed space for a long period of time, and you pretty quickly figure out who's mentally stable enough to live in those kind of conditions in a remote area. And so the the other part of it is, when people leave the module, they act like they're leaving a real Mars module on Mars. So they put on a spacesuit and they go outside and they're doing their geology and weather and all that kind of stuff.
Well, you got a dome for growing food here too?
Yep. We've got all that. So, what we're going to first do is we're going to look at what some of the resource utilization process that we have planned here, and then we're going to look at some of the energy infrastructure, and then we'll go inside, and so then we'll look at what the interior facilities are. So,
Oh, okay.
As a little bit preface for the first resource utilization stuff is that the original Mars mission projects that NASA had planned in the first in the 70s and then in the 80s always planned on essentially similar missions like Apollo, where they would send astronauts to Mars, land, put a flag in the ground, and then take off after collecting some rocks and so forth.
Well,
home.
I don't want to interrupt you, but they did land the Mars rover on
Yes,
Mars.
but we're talking about people, and the problem with that sort of a mission is that when you do that, you have to all the fuel you'll need to get home from Mars back to Earth, you need to carry with you from Earth to Mars. And in order to do that, you need a lot bigger rocket on Earth to bring all that extra fuel up into space. And you need more tanks, and everything needs to be bigger, and bigger means more expensive. And this is why the mission to Mars with humans never happened, is because it always came out to be way too expensive. And so in the late 90s, a aerospace engineer by the name of Dr. Robert Zuckerman, he's written The Case for Mars and several other books on the topic, dug up a 19th century chemical engineering process, called the Sabatier process, that would allow people to make rocket fuel, essentially liquid methane and liquid oxygen, from carbon dioxide and water. And we know that there's carbon dioxide in Mars because that's what the atmosphere there is. And we know that there's water on Mars because there's ice there. And so let's go over and we're going to look at the Sabatier process facility, and we'll explain how this works. So follow me over here. So as we're passing along, you'll see that on either side there are some SpaceX Starship rockets. So we've got one of those that's scripted that we're going to be people will be able to take rides between our main museum part of the region and here. And so they'll be able to have some simulated zero gravity. Let me
walking over everybody. My AM don't work, so sorry, guys.
Okay, so we've got all these colored tanks here that have labels on them, and right in front of me is this control panel that has the diagram showing the same stuff. And so you see from left to right, we've got on the left side, we've got a carbon dioxide CO2 tank. And on top of that is a turbo compressor that basically sucks all the CO2 in from the atmosphere and compresses it into a liquid form in the tank. And then to the right of that is another tank that's the Sabatier catalyzer. And so in there is a pebble bed of platinum pebbles that are essentially acting as a catalyst for the process. And then around the outside, you see that there's this coil, which is a high power induction coil that will heat up the interior with an induction field. And then to the right of that is a liquid hydrogen tank. And to the right of that tank is the water tank and the water electrolyzer. And then to the right of that is the CH4 liquid methane tank. And then way over on the right is the liquid oxygen or LOX tank. And so on the left there, we start off with
The
liquid
logs.
CO2.
It goes into a liquid, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So we have the liquid CO2 in the liquid CO2 tank, and at the start we have that, and then we have the H2O, the water tank, filled with water made from Martian ice. So that's our starting point. And so then the uh, we use electricity to electrolyze the water to separate it into liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So the liquid oxygen or LOX goes into that far right tank, the blue tank over there. So that's what the LOX is, what we use as an oxidizer for rocket fuel in our Starship rockets. So that's all taken care of. So the liquid hydrogen that goes into the tank that's on the left middle there and the CO2 get put into that catalyzer tank. And so the once the catalyzer tank is filled with carbon dioxide and liquid hydrogen, then the induction coil cranks up and it heats up the interior, and the platinum pellets electrolyze or catalyze the reaction between the hydrogen and the CO2, and they convert it into water, steam, and methane. And so those two gases go up through the top of that tank into a condenser that radiates the heat and causes the water to cool down enough to turn from steam back into water, so it goes back into the water tank. And then we still have gaseous methane, CH4, that goes out of the water tank and through another condenser that cools it down more, and so it turns the methane into liquid methane, and that fills up the liquid methane tanks. And so that's the entire process. So, you start off with CO2 and water, you put in some electricity, and you wind up getting liquid methane and liquid oxygen to fuel up your rocket to get home. And so all this propellant's been made with materials that is uh, acquired, that's available here on Mars. So we don't need to carry all that rocket fuel with us from Earth in order for the rocket to get back to Earth to pick up more people and cargo and so forth. And so this is a great example of the in situ resource utilization methodology that we'll be using for everything on Mars. So we'll be able to uh, make steel from there's tons of iron oxides on Mars. That's why Mars is red. There's billions of years of accumulated nickel iron asteroid meteorites that are sitting on Mars that have been raining down there for a long time without much or any erosion eroding them. So there's tons of nickel and iron to make steel from. There's lots of carbonates to make concrete with, and there's lots of silicates to make glass with, and solar cells with, and so we get there's tons of resources available on Mars that we can make everything we need. Once we have our first basic facilities, then we can build everything else from materials that are found on Mars. So um, you may be wondering, well, where are you getting the electricity with? Well, we've got up on the, if you cam up onto the rim of the crater, you see we've got solar panels up there and we've got some windmills up there. So the sunlight on Mars is about only about 40% of the sunlight we have on Earth. So, it's not as powerful, but it's still there. And then we have windmills, and the atmosphere on Mars is very thin right now. It's only 6 millibars density, which is, Earth sea level on Earth is 1,000 millibars, so it's a very, very thin atmosphere. But the average wind velocity is 60 to 120 kilometers an hour, most of the time. So, between that and carbon dioxide being about 30% more dense than liquid, than nitrogen and oxygen, and we get nearly as much energy from a given windmill on Mars as you do in most places on Earth. So between the wind and the solar, you can generate energy most of the time on Mars, but not all the time, because sometimes the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining because, of course, there's night, but there's also, particularly in the spring on Mars, a Martian year is 2 Earth years long, and the spring is about 6 to 8 months long, and most of that, the atmosphere is filled with dust storms that obscure the sunlight. And so there's a limit to how much power we can generate with these two renewable methods. So we have one more method we're going to go take a look at. Why don't you follow me through here? Do, 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 Okay, do we have everybody? Is everyone here? We got Chris is behind us there. Shell is still over. Okay, so when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, we still need to have power for the base for people to live on. And so what we've got here is a small nuclear reactor. And this is called the MP200 reactor, and it's a very, very safe and stable reactor. And I know everybody's heard that, and most people don't believe it when they hear it, but this is actually something that works that way. So if you cam down in the bottom, you see that there's this yellow orange glowing section. So that's where the core is. And so down there, there's a plug of basically a donut of high grade plutonium. And in the middle of the donut is a control rod that is held up above. Something goes wrong and the power is cut, then that control rod drops right down into the middle of the donut and it cuts off the nuclear reaction automatically. And so there's essentially it's a fail-safe system. And so the heat from the plutonium, right, no boom booms. So the heat from the reaction will it keeps a liquid metal like sodium or mercury, but most likely sodium, um, hot. And the if you look inside, there's the green section where the liquid metal bath is, and just above the green section, you see inside those the fin area there. There are those four blue modules with silver fins on top of them. And so those four blue modules are Stirling motors. So the liquid metal comes up from the bottom and heats up the bottom, and there's a single moving part in each of those. It's a piston that goes up and down really fast. And so the up and down motion there's an electromagnetic coil around it, so it generates electricity from that up and down motion. And then once the liquid metal has gone through there, it then goes into these big fins on the outside that expand and go up into the air to radiate the excess heat into the Martian atmosphere. And then so the metal flows up those fins on the interior, and when it gets up to that ring up there, it flows through those spokes into the center uh, column there and flows back down into the bath to pick up more heat. So it doesn't require any pumps. It's just a normal convection current that happens, and that happens passively. And so essentially this in this whole reactor, there's five moving parts. There's the control rod for the reactor core, and there's each Stirling motor has a single piston. So you have five moving parts, and each one of those Stirling generators there can run without any maintenance whatsoever for at least 6 years. And then it's just a matter of unhitching one of them, bringing it inside, swapping out basically refurbishing the piston, putting it back in, swapping rings, seals, things like that, and popping it back in there, and you're good to go. And so this is a very low maintenance module. It operates passively, and it generates each one of those four blue Stirling generators will generate 50 kilowatts of power. So we all told we have 200 kilowatts of power for the Mars base. So that's our base load power for the Mars base is 200 kilowatts, which is plenty. And so when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, and the base people need to keep the radiators on because is the Mars climate is sort of like they call it Antarctica in an ice box. So it's Mars is colder than Antarctica, and so it's very hard to live there out normally, and so you got to keep your habitat warm so you don't freeze your little tooties. So okay, so that's our base load power. So let's go take a look at how we're getting some of these resources. Follow me out here. Okay, so um, when we're talking about using other Martian resources, most of that has to do with mining. And so this is our mine here. So basically, it's pretty simple. You see these four robots here, and in front, and each one of them has two drums, one in front and one in back, that are rotating, counter rotating against each other very slowly, and they have little scoop teeth on them, and so they're scooping up Martian dirt. Scientific term for dirt that is not on Earth we call regolith, and so Martian regolith gets scooped into the inside of those drums as they rotate, and when the drums are full, then these big pistons on the side pull the arms up, and the drums get pulled up with them up over the bins here. And when they're over the bins, then the drums reverse directions. So then the regolith comes out of those black scoop blades there and dumps into the bin. And so once the bin is full, then the robot rolls off to the far left to the end of the mining area and up on a ramp, and it dumps all the regolith out a little slot in the bottom of the bin onto a uh, tramway there, or a what's the proper term? I can't remember. Anyways, it that goes into the refinery that separates all the dirt into its constituent elements. So your iron, your nickel, manganese, all your chromium, silica, carbonates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all that stuff. There's all kinds of cool stuff. There's um, different iron compounds, whether it's olivine or magnetite or whatever. There's tons of different types of iron compounds, and we're just basically going to take those and then refine them into steel and glass and all kinds of stuff. So with that stuff, then we can start building our structures. And so we're going to start looking at some of those structures now. If you follow me here, take a hop over the power lines. Hey, Luna. Okay. So this is the first module that will be built on Mars, and it will be made with components made from Earth. And this will basically be the only module that will be fully made from components made on Earth. And after that, the rest will all be made from stuff made on Mars. So this has 3 floors, and so we'll have a equipment and excursion floor here where people will basically be doing having their spacesuits and having uh, their tooling, their 3D printing, all of their industrial work here. Then the next floor above that will be where they have their bunks and some of their scientific stuff. And then the top floor will be for their scientific research work. And so, as well as you see there's windows, so they'll be doing essentially flight direction for landings and takeoffs from the rocket pads and so forth. And you notice that if you look at this entire module from the outside, it's covered with Martian regolith on the outside. There's a big skirt of it on the first level, and then there's like these kind of roofs and up on the top, because radiation on Mars is a real thing. If you spent your entire day outside on Mars, you'd basically get the equivalent of a couple X-rays of radiation every day, which is not very healthy in the long run. So um, a couple feet of regolith will provide all the shielding you need. And you notice how the outside of this module casing is also coated with concrete, so that's additional shielding as well. And so with that, you get most of the shielding you need. So this will be useful for living in for the next 6 to 12 months and so forth. It gives the original crews here plenty of time to start working on the next phase of development. And so the next phase is they're going to be bringing up large 3D printing technologies. And so they'll be 3D printing entire living modules on Mars from all the steel and concrete and glass and so forth. And so the first one of those is right through here. And so you see it's pretty basic. So we've got look what looks like 8 bunks on each side. You can use these bin areas for sleeping quarters or for storage and so forth. And each one of these modules, looks pretty basic, but built into the walls is going to be some sophisticated stuff. Like there's going to be backup power, there's going to be auxiliary water. Essentially, each module needs to be able to function as its own little spaceship. So the doors on each end will seal up tight like an airlock. And the reason for that is that if there's a Mars quake, then the modules that are connected together may come out of alignment and break the seal. And when that happens, the leak will be detected, and so the doors will just close shut to preserve the Earth normal atmosphere in here. And until people elsewhere in the facility can get around to you know resealing things, the people that are inside need to operate in this module as if they're in a spaceship that's isolated from everybody else. So there'll be some rations and water, and there'll be power and so on and so forth. And so this will be the first one, and then they'll be making 4 more modules just like it, as well as this hub module. And then there'll be additional airlocks on either end. And we've got another module below us here through that hatch that you're standing on, Shellen, which will go down, and that'll be drilling the first well on Mars down there to get water for the facility. And above us is where the servers are going to be for the facility, as well as some other equipment. And so this is going to be essentially when the next crews arrive, this will provide additional living facility. Oh yes, it's the water there it's been there for billions of years. It's in a natural state. It's not unless it's up at the North or South Pole. It's not going to be pure water. It's going to be very muddy with a lot of Martian dirt mixed into it. But that gets filtered out, and they can easily filter it to a very high degree, so to normal potable drinkable human standards. So that's not a big deal. And as far as we know so far, there isn't any life on Mars at present. We haven't discovered any life yet, or even signs. We know that there used to be a lot of running water on Mars. We found places where there were running rivers, a long time ago. And but yeah, water treatment's a very known technology. So this is phase 2 of the Mars colony. So let's go through here, and we'll look at phase 3. Okay, so this is phase 3, and this is where we start to dearly dig down into the Mars and start building more underground. And so this is what we call our universal habitat facility, and it's based upon the ideas of sustainable agriculture developed by um, NASA rocket scientist um, Greg Allison, who's a pioneer in sustainable agriculture. No problem. And so what we've built here is a multi-level facility that's built mostly underground, where we've got living facilities on the south end that are backed up against the wall to provide more radiation protection. And then we've got all these terraces of uh, growing capability for all kinds of plants. So we've got pineapples and strawberries. We've got legumes and other, peas and beans and berries and grapes and other stuff growing up against the wall across the way there. And then in those terraces, we've got sunflowers and lettuce and tomatoes and pears and all kinds of stuff growing there. And then if you look up above us, we see that we've got these glass containers that are hanging from the dome. Basically, the mass of the water that's in these containers is weighing down the dome structure to keep, because the outside is a very low pressure. It's only 6 millibars, but inside we're going to have a more Earth normal pressure, and that's wanting to push that dome off into the sky, and so the mass of the water is helping to keep that dome down so that the strain from it is not entirely on the foundation. It's basically keeping itself, it's anchoring itself down. And so when the sunlight comes in, and it's going to be if you look outside, you see there's this kind of a structure that has these wings. Let me show you how these wings rotate. I'm going to fold them out, and get this, do this right. I'm trying to get a local rotation. It's not liking me doing a local rotation. Oh, here we go. There we go. So during the daylight, these solar wings will fold out and collect base generate energy, and then the big dish behind it will reflect sunlight back in to the into the dome structure here. That seems to be out of alignment for some reason. Anyways, the that's why it is. And so we basically, between the reflections of the reflector there and the dome, we'll be able to get nearly the same amount of sunlight in here as you would see on Earth. And so the heat from the sunlight evaporates the water from those containers that are weighing down the dome, and so the vapor will then condense on the glass of the dome and run down to the bottom of the dome, where there's a gutter channel there that collects it, and then it runs, that water will then go down through all these terraces to progressively irrigate all the different crops here, and then it will wind up down into the big cistern down in the middle at the bottom floor. Let's head down there and take a look at what we've got down there. So down up in the pools above, we'll be growing like algae, and we'll be growing baby fish. And when the baby fish grow big enough, they'll get transferred down into the big cistern down here, and they'll grow into even bigger fish for harvesting for protein. So between the fish and the plants, then we basically have a very complete diet for our original colonists. And we see there's sort of a what would we call it, a pueblo kind of structure behind the stage there on three different levels. The bottom level is going to be all the bunk rooms, so the deepest level is going to provide the most radiation shielding, and the upper levels will be work areas, offices, and labs, and so forth. Hey, Luna, thanks for coming. So this is phase 3, and so about this time is when the really heavy equipment starts arriving, when SpaceX has their Starship version 2, which is going to be twice as big as the Starship version 1 that they're developing now. And they're going to be shipping big tunnel boring machines to Mars. So you may have heard that they have a company called the Boring Company for boring tunnels here on Earth for hyperloops. Well, one of the things when you look at all the different businesses that Elon Musk backs, and seems to be a wide range of enterprises, but you need, if once you understand his motivation, you realize that everything is linked together. So everything that he invests in is a technology that is needed for people to live on Mars. So of course, rockets, because you need to get to Mars, right? Um, we need Starlink for having a communication system all around Mars. So there's going to be Starlink satellites orbiting Mars in the future. There's no oil on Mars, so of course you need electric cars. So then that's why we have Tesla. Solar City for the same reason, because we need solar panels. And there's the Hyperloop, because you long distance transit on Mars, you can't go on the surface, it needs to be underground. So that's what the Hyperloop is about. And the Boring Company is all about digging the tunnels, not only for the Hyperloop, but also for all the living quarters for long term colonists on Mars. So once you comprehend everything that he's doing is based upon stuff that's needed on Mars, and he figures out how to get real world markets here on Earth to capitalize it, it becomes pretty clear. Ah, this is not going to be an RP sim per se for play. I mean, groups are welcome to do so if they want to, but our training system it is going to have role play aspects to it, because the training system is going to be structured like a video game. So when you'll earn points from operating, learning to operate equipment, troubleshooting it, fixing it, repairing it, um, collecting resources, producing parts to repair things with. So it'll be a gamified system, and people will be able to team up into groups to collaborate on this sort of thing. So you may have teams from different universities or high schools working together as part of projects for their classwork to learn to do all this kind of stuff. So, okay, so let's take once the tunnel boring machines get in, then we'll be digging tunnels. So follow me into phase 4. So here we've got 2 levels of tunneling with basically the tunnel boring machines will come in and bore the tunnels, and right behind them will be 3D printing machines that will 3D print the modules right behind the tunnel boring machines. So it'll be a very industrialized process. So let's take a look. We've got all these different hallways that are much like the earlier ones, but then we've got larger ones in between that are more like homes or office spaces. So this is one of our dome modules that's underground. And so we could have a second floor in this space built in here. I mean, this would be big enough for, let's say, a family of 4 to 6 people. And then below us here, you see this kind of a basement down here. Then the idea is that if you ever read Frank Herbert's Dune novel, the Fremen who lived in a very dry climate would collect water in underground lakes in what they called their sieges. And so each one of these types of modules will have a basement that's a cistern that will collect water. So with we want to collect and store water long term on Mars in these types of facilities so that every module will have water supply and distribute the water supply out so that every part of the base can take responsibility for some of the water. All right, follow me through here. So this is our phase 4 agricultural facility. And here we've got this very deep 4-story agricultural module that will be able to have a lot of vertical farming and illumination on every level and all kinds of different crops. So let's jump up and jump down here. And so down here below us is a much larger cistern that can be used for storing water, for growing more fish. It's even big. I even thought about putting a rowboat down there. It's so big down there. So this is a really large size agricultural module that will be able to do a lot of crops in different rotations and keep everything irrigated. So let's go through here and we'll see the next to the right over here. There we go. All right, take a left. Doot, 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 doot. So we were talking about Hyperloop and the Boring Company. So this is the Mars Colony's Hyperloop station. So we're going to, in a few minutes, we'll have our Hyperloop train will come in here, and we'll all be able to take the Hyperloop train around. We've got a 2-kilometer loop track here underground that with 2 stations. So there's this station and the other station is to a quarantine isolation facility that's underneath where the rocket landing pads are. So normally when colonists arrive, they'll go into the quarantine facilities to make sure that they're not infectious. So they'll spend about 2 weeks there once the colony's running, and then once they get released, they'll be able to take the Hyperloop around to the main colony here. We've got our excuse me. We've got our Mars coin ATM here because one of the things that they intend to do on Mars is they don't want to have an actual government. What they want to do is they want to have all government functions be smart contracts on a Mars coin blockchain. So, births, deaths, marriages, divorces, licenses, um, property ownership, some prospecting claims, crop trades, all kinds of any kind of economic activity or administrative function can be executed in a smart contract on a blockchain, and that will monetize the blockchain. And so that'll vastly decrease the size and scope of government. And so here's our train. So everybody pick a seat and sit on the train. So you wanna right click on a chair and pick a sit. This is going to turn non-physical once everybody's taken care of, and we'll hear the notification from the computer AI as to what's going on in a minute.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
And here we are. And we can walk right out the door there. It's a little tight if you're more than human sized. So this is we're now in the quarantine station. So in here, you can see in here we've got, first ahead is the elevator. But you can see here, we've got bunks for colonists arriving. And we've got more here. So here we've got an operations center. We've on the right here, we've got a laboratory. So we got our microscopes and our Bunsen burners, and then over here we got more bunks. And one of my Easter eggs in here is over here. So here's our lavatory. So I had originally made lavatory modules where each module had its own types of equipment. So there'd be one module for the sink, one for sinks, so there'd be 2 rows of sinks, another module with 2 rows of showers, and another with toilets. But for this one, I made it compact with all of them together. And you notice above the sink, I've got a mirror here that has a bit of unique rendering that essentially I made this image here using a bit of trickery, but it's really made for the module where there's two sinks on either side with mirrors on either side, and so you get the infinite mirror effect, but that doesn't actually exist in this module because there's not mirrors facing each other. So what we're seeing in this little 6-module complex here is duplicated on the other side. So basically the whole facility here on this side, we can handle, I think it's like 36 or 40 colonists arriving, going into quarantine immediately for a couple weeks. And so in the entire colony at present, this entire colony is built to have well over 200 people living in the facility. So all the underground tunnels and everything there's 2 levels to the tunnels, and lots of capabilities here. So that's the tour. What's that? Oh, this is the operations center. So here you can see that there's scans of different terrain and so forth. So from here, they'll be able to manage various vehicles remotely and so on and so forth. Does anybody have any questions?
And I say no, but this is so cool. I'm impressed, Mike. Very impressed.
Thanks.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Mike, you're filming this?
Oh, very
Should-
nice, Mike.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Send us a link for that.
Yeah, please send everybody a link, because I would like to give it to people.